Will I need to unmute? Yeah.
Yes, and if you could please unmute yourself. It sounds like you've already done that.
Thank you. Hi, good evening, everyone. I wanted to make 2 comments tonight. I'm a person that in my career has worked with really large studies, really large bodies of analyses, really large reports, and my concern has been growing over the months since I first brought this up. I'm feeling pretty anxious about it. And that is that we still haven't done our design standards that I've seen. And there's been so much work on the general plan that has been done by you great GPAC members, but we're not seeing it. And the longer we wait, this is my concern, the longer we wait, the less time that we will have to review it, to dig into it. Design standards in other cities, they go down to the neighborhood level so that we're not seeing generic buildings going up. Something that, you know, on the east side that looks just like something on the north side, look something on the south side, etc. Distinct characteristics of neighborhoods reflected in distinct design standards per neighborhoods. That's the standard these days that I see. And I really want that for Petaluma, and I'm afraid that we're not going to get it. The general plan, I've spent hundreds of hours with our general plan. It is quite a document. It is very detailed, very long, very complex, and it's not just the general plan. The general plan refers to hazard mitigation plan, river access and enhancement plan, to our municipal code, to our ordinances. And all of those things need to be precisely cross-referenced correctly to get your vision locked in and ensured, because you get one word wrong and it's got big consequences. Here's a good example. With Sid Commons, the developer kept saying, oh, the general plan calls for gutting the river, calls for destroying habitat, calls for using outdated flood mitigation practices that are obsolete now, that mean gut the entire river. And citizens had to fight so much for that. And it went back and forth forever because the developer kept pointing to the vague language. We need to cover off on all of that. So I asked tonight for you to please push for immediate release of some draft for all the ad hoc work that we've done. I participated on natural resources, but we need to get a draft so we can start looking at it, going through it with a fine-tooth comb. Otherwise, it's going to be too late. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for your comment. And next up, Susan, whenever you are ready, we'll restart the timer. Please unmute yourself, and I'll start just as soon as you're ready.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you, committee members, for being present this evening. Thank you to Taryn Obaid for her presence and her always very thoughtful comments. I noticed in the roll call this evening that I believe you have 7 members absent, and 1 member is now reported to have stepped aside and is moving on to something else. You know, there are some of us in the community who were involved with the current general plan that's going to expire. I was one of those people attending every single meeting that was ever held way back when. And I'd like to say that I was an applicant for your GPAC. I was very hopeful to be appointed, especially with my ability to contribute to our environmental information. Unfortunately, when the staff did a graph and analyzed applications, my information, along with some others, was misrepresented and not reported accurately. But anyway, I didn't receive any votes for the GPAC. I did hear Councilmember Shrib's question why I wasn't higher up on the list of preferences. and noting that I probably had the deepest environmental experience to bring to the committee. So I'm still available. I see you've had one committee member apparently step aside. If any of you feel inclined to speak to any of our elected officials to suggest that I have been attending all of your meetings, I participated in the work group for natural resources and open space and think that work group needs to be reopened and revisited. I'm very concerned about the fact that your committee has prioritized environment and equity as the two cornerstones through which all other chapters and elements should be assessed. And I feel that the environmental part of the general plan to date is not complete and really needs a lot more work. So I'm just reaching out to you as committee members. Please speak to our electeds. If you feel that I would be helpful to you on the committee, I would be happy to serve. And I appreciate all of you who have made the time tonight to uphold your responsibility and to be present, noting that your committee has not met for some time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. So with that, I don't see any more hands raised. So I'll turn it back over to Christina or Ron.
Christina, if you want to run through the quick project-related updates.
Yes, happy to. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. All right. Here we are, looking at the overall sequence of the general plan. I do want to note that when we originally began this process, we anticipated that it might be a 2-year process. We ended up wanting to, or the city and community ended up deciding to take some more time with the general plan and to prioritize the completion of the housing element. That is now complete and also certified from HCD. So we have a fully certified housing element, which is a great thing. Many of the cities in the Bay Area do not have a certified housing element. And in fact, many of the cities in Southern California that were a few years ahead of us also don't have certified housing elements. So we feel really proud of that work. We are also in the midst of developing our climate action and adaptation plan and our policies and alternatives. One of the pieces that we are working on that relates to this is floodplain modeling, which I will talk about in a couple of slides. But because of all of this ongoing work, we're actively working on updating this schedule. And so we plan to have a new and more detailed schedule for you all in the next month or two. Next slide, please. The housing element final steps, as I just mentioned, we got notification today that our housing element is certified. So we are really pleased with that. Thank you to all of the many hours that you spent helping us to shape that document. On the climate action planning front, we have a complete draft that staff is working with the Ramey team on refining for our greenhouse gas reduction strategy. We're actually going to be handling adaptation in concert with the general plan because it relates more closely to land use. But we expect that in the coming months, we will be coming forward to the climate action plan with a draft of that document. They have been working with us on that document in pieces, but we'll come with a full public draft, and then we will come through GPAC with that as well. Although because there is so much to cover in the general plan, it's likely to be a shorter conversation with this body, but we will let you know when the fuller public conversation is happening. On the floodplain and sea level rise, we are on our second or third or fourth round of refinements with the consultant, West Consultants out of San Diego, to develop a floodplain and sea level rise methodology. We've been working with Roger Leventhal of the GPAC, who can't be here, but who is involved in this process. to ensure that we're using cutting edge approaches to make sure that we have the best, most scientifically defensible model possible. And we are working to bring that to the public as quickly as possible. It may be that we have a general plan advisory committee and public meeting in person. Right now, I think that we're aiming for July, but working on refining that date. Any other updates? There are many things happening in the city, so it's always a good idea to read the community updates and sign up for updates on both the Plan Petaluma page as well as the city's website. Thank you. Do any GPAC members have any questions? All right.
Ask, to
I'm sorry, Kevin is breaking up for me. All right, let's move on and hope that Kevin rejoins. If he rejoins, we'll pause and let him
react
ask
to
his
it,
question.
and there's no time.
Kevin, I'm so sorry. You froze for that whole time until the very last couple of words. Can you let us know again what your
Sure.
question was?
So I'll speak more slowly. Maybe that'll help. Taryn Abaid, I think her name was, who spoke first on the community. I share her concerns completely. I am very afraid that we might get backed into not having enough time to really react fully to things that are maybe detail oriented, but very important. So the sooner we can get what she was asking for, the better, because otherwise, exactly what she fears, it'll just be a developer kind of bland solution to everything, that could come to pass if we don't have time to review these things. So I think that's a very, very big concern, and I'd ask when we might expect that.
So there are two different pieces there. There are the objective design standards and additional policy and land use work for the general plan. Right now, staff is working on finalizing comments to Ramey on the policy frameworks that we walked through with the GPAC over the course of, I think it was around 6 meetings. So that will be coming fairly shortly. We do want to get into our land use and adaptation conversations so that we can also be working on alternatives. So we'll be giving more detail on all of that. And we're working on the schedule now to make sure that there's enough process to make sure that it's complete, and also an efficient enough process to make sure that we complete the general plan in a reasonable amount of time. So we'll share more detail on that. Some of the GPAC members might be thinking, I said 2 years, y'all. So we appreciate your continued hanging out with us. So we'll give more detail on that. On the objective design standards, that is a document that we are working on bringing a draft to Planning Commission on. So that's coming too.
Yeah, the sooner the better.
Okay, I think next on the agenda, unless there are any other GPAC questions, was to turn things over to our guest this evening, Pete Gang, and with support from Dave Alden. So if you haven't already, Daniel, please make Pete a co-host, and Pete, you can go ahead and share screen and start your presentation. As a reminder, everybody, Pete will make his presentation, then we'll have a brief few minutes for any clarifying questions from GPAC. Then we'll go to public comment and then come back for more robust GPAC discussion.
Okay. I am sharing screen. Maybe
You are. We can see your notes and everything. So you might just want to go into slideshow mode unless you have another screen for your
Okay.
speaker notes.
One might have expected that there would be a little hiccup in this whole process. Let me try that again. Slideshow, presenter view.
And yeah, when you
Mark
push that,
isn't-
then we can see the notes. How about this, Pete? How about I show the slides and you can have your notes on your screen? And you do have to say, next slide, please, but that's cool.
Next slide, please.
We'll
I
grin and bear it.
I might not always say please. And sometimes I might just say next. And sometimes I might say nothing at all when I should have said next. Okay.
If there is an awkward pause, I will forward the slides. Okay. Can you stop sharing, Pete?
Stop share. Yes.
Great.
Okay.
Can everybody see the slideshow? Great. All right, Pete,
Okay.
whenever you're ready.
I'm almost ready. Now I have to. Okay, I'm ready. I will try to remember to speak slowly and pause in between sentences. Just as a bit of a preface, I just wanted to make clear to everybody who might not be familiar with American Institute of Architects Sustainable Design Assessment Team process. The American Institute of Architects is a national organization. It's the professional organization for architects. And for several years, they've been offering the services of architects and other design professionals to communities around the country who request their services in helping solve urban design related issues. And this slide presentation is the result of what our local team asked of the American Institute of Architects and what resulted from it. So I will begin. If asked, most of us would say that we are in favor of progress, in favor of a better tomorrow. But what does progress mean if we don't have a clear sense of where we're headed? The city of Petaluma has made a commitment to rapidly transition toward an equitable, carbon neutral future within 7 years, a future that we are now beginning to imagine. Next slide. As a city, we need a shared vision of where we're going, a vision of what a prosperous, equitable, resilient, zero carbon, regenerative city might look like. And to get there, we need to get beyond business as usual. We need some big, bold ideas. I'm speaking tonight on behalf of an ad hoc group of 15 Petaluma residents, some of whom are members of GPAC, who came together more than 3 years ago out of our shared interest in helping our city align its sights toward that prosperous, carbon neutral future. Next. In December of 2019, we applied to the American Institute of Architects for a Sustainable Design Assessment Team, or SDAT, grant to bring to Petaluma a multidisciplinary team of urban design experts to assist us with some big, bold ideas. In January of 2020, the American Institute of Architects, the AIA, selected Petaluma, one of only 8 communities nationwide, to receive a grant worth $180,000 in design services. Although the project was put on hold for 2 years due to COVID, it was revived in 2022. Next. In early August of last year, the AIA team spent 4 days in Petaluma to focus on our selected topic, namely complete 15-minute neighborhoods and living streets. The AIA team reviewed relevant documents, visited sites around town, next slide, conducted meetings with over 350 community members, drew maps and made sketches, and made recommendations that were then presented to City Council on August 8th. Next slide, please. Their final report, titled Reimagining Petaluma, was delivered 3 months later, in November of last year. This presentation is a short summary of their final report with commentary by members of our local group, the group that brought the SDAT team to our city. The purpose of this presentation and others that we will be making over the next few weeks is to ensure that the big, bold ideas of the AIA's experts are fully integrated into our city's guiding documents, into our general plan, climate action and adaptation plan, active transportation plan, and other key documents. The time has come to turn words into action. Next slide. The SDAT team of design professionals collaborated to develop a suite of integrated solutions, ones that would solve multiple problems simultaneously. Their recommendations address issues of land use, transportation, ecosystem health, climate, equity, financial stability, and more. We'll start with their recommendations for 15-minute neighborhoods. Next slide, please. What is a 15-minute neighborhood? Their final report offers this. Next slide. And this is a quote from their report. The 15-minute city is a concept that describes a residential community with a decentralized mixed-use development node that provides most of the residents' daily needs within a 15-minute walk from all the residents' homes. Next slide. Within a short walk or bike ride, people of all ages and abilities living in a 15-minute neighborhood have safe and convenient access to a wide variety of grocery and other retail stores, coffee shops, restaurants, schools, daycare facilities, parks, playing fields, public open spaces, community gardens, civic amenities, and more. Next slide. This is, after all, how people lived for all of human history up until a little over 100 years ago, when the automobile arrived on the scene and came to dominate the public realm. Until that time, all previous generations had lived in villages, in towns and cities that allowed older people to move about safely on their own, that allowed children to play in the street, and that fostered chance conversations between neighbors. The street was a public living room. Next slide. As the urbanist and writer Jane Jacobs said, lowly, unpurposeful, and random as they appear, sidewalk contacts are the small change from which a city's wealth of public life must grow. Although Jacobs wrote this in 1961, the concept remains as relevant today as ever. Next slide. The AIA team started their analysis using what they call a 15-minute walk circle. The radius of the 15-minute walk circle represents the distance that an average person can walk in about 15 minutes, about 3/4 of a mile. Here we have a 15-minute walk circle centered over our downtown. Next slide. Then, after looking at a range of social and environmental data, the AIA team overlaid 15-minute walk circles over a map of the whole city. This map shows 9 overlapping walk circles, each centered on a mixed-use development node. As the AIA team said in their final report, quote, "The maps and drawings present within this section were created during our 4-day visit and are intended to be conceptual and illustrative rather than prescriptive. The intention was not to create detailed schematics, but rather to spark inspiration and a new way of thinking about these areas. Next slide. We, the local team, enthusiastically support the development of 15-minute walkable mixed-use neighborhoods and believe that the location of the mixed-use neighborhood nodes merits more careful study and community input. Next slide. Cities throughout history have always grown and changed organically. Because our present zoning codes tend to discourage mixed-use development, they inhibit organic growth and change. Next slide. We believe it's important to encourage the spontaneous development of mixed-use neighborhoods through revisions to our zoning code that would permit limited commercial uses on parcels currently zoned exclusively residential, with uses and hours as appropriate. Next slide. Doing so would reintroduce the much needed element of liveliness, of neighborliness and community into our residential neighborhoods. Next, transportation. Next slide, please. The SDAT team titled this section, Reimagining Mobility. At the August 5th community meeting, the AIA team heard participants identify 5 key challenges that our roadway system presents here in Petaluma. Next. They heard the community voice these concerns: fragmented bikeway network, limited crosstown connectivity, motorists speeding through neighborhoods, narrow sidewalks, and unreliable transit service. Now, these are not revelatory concepts. We local folks already know these realities. These are our complaints, though it gives us some reassurance to hear our concerns voiced by an outside expert. Next slide. The first set of recommended actions in the final report is grouped under the heading Remove Barriers. And first among them is Fix Washington Street. The report reads, quote, "The city and its partners must fix Washington Street to meet its goals related to climate resiliency, carbon neutrality, vehicle miles traveled, connectivity, and safety." The report illustrates the big, bold fix as what they call a green ribbon of connected corridors, a complete and integrated network that starts by transforming Washington Street and then our other 4-lane arterials, our stroads, Eli Boulevard, McDowell Boulevard, and others, transforming them into green corridors. In this illustration, a typical 100-foot wide roadway right-of-way is transformed into 33 feet for vehicles with wide planting areas and multi-use pathways on both sides. Next slide. Imagine Washington Street between, say, Petaluma Boulevard and McDowell Boulevard transformed. Next slide. The report also calls for, quote, transforming gray corridors into healthy, walkable, bikeable, resource-rich, diverse corridors. The transformed arterials would then be connected to our existing network of creekside multi-use trails to create a complete and integrated mobility network linking all of our schools, parks, playgrounds, ball fields, and commercial districts. Next slide. Such a system is designed with consideration of the needs not just of bicycle riders and pedestrians, but also of drivers of all types of vehicles and users of all types of mobility devices, both self-powered and powered by electricity. Among the other recommendations in the final report, 3 others stand out. Next slide. First, the AIA team identified our street design standards as being out of step with our intentions and with current best practices. Our street design standards were last updated in 1996. The report reads, quote, "Best practices for street design in the United States have evolved in profound ways since then, especially in the arenas of prioritizing safety for active transportation and incorporating landscaping and green infrastructure." Next slide. Second, the report recommends improving transit reliability and frequency in order to encourage all residents and visitors to use transit rather than drive. And third, next slide, that we create a neighborhood traffic calming program. From the report, quote, "In addition to more traditional traffic calming treatments such as curb extensions and speed humps, the city should explore or continue to explore mini traffic circles, raised crosswalks, chicanes, and one-lane pinch points." This illustration shows a clever and very simple solution. It's just paint on pavement. And I'll just digress for a minute. The city is in the process of developing a neighborhood traffic calming program, but the range of traffic calming solutions that they are currently envisioning is far limited. It's limited beyond, it doesn't include the ones that they are suggesting. Next slide. So in summary, our vision for a prosperous, resilient, regenerative city requires policy implementation that will facilitate necessary physical changes. Reconfigure streets, re-wild and green streets, neighborhoods and parks, reduce average car speeds, allow varied uses in existing residential areas, create mixed-use development cores in convenient locations, de-emphasize car parking, and reimagine the transit system to align with the changes above. Next slide. In summary, the high-level recommendations we wish to reinforce and advance are these. 1, integrate the big, bold ideas contained in the SDAT final report into all our guiding documents. And the general plan among all of our guiding documents is certainly one of the most powerful. So this is good to be presenting this to this group of people. 2, actively work toward and remove barriers to creating mixed-use 15-minute neighborhood nodes in convenient locations. And 3, fully commit to the goal of our 2008 Bike and Pedestrian Master Plan, which is to build a safe, comprehensive, and integrated bicycle and pedestrian system throughout Petaluma that encourages bicycling and walking and is accessible to all. Next slide. Our future, for all that it might or might not be, is a shared future. We're all in this together, and we need to work together as a community to realize our shared vision. And next slide. So thank you for the opportunity to bring this family of ideas out into the public discourse. And thanks to the city of Petaluma for helping fund and support this whole effort. Thanks to our strategic partners, and thanks to all the hardworking community members who have advanced this project to this stage and will continue to advance the project through to incorporation in our guiding documents. Next slide. that's all I have. So I hope that's fodder to spur some discussion.
Thank you, Pete. This group doesn't usually need fodder, but you've given them plenty, and so I expect a robust conversation. But just as a reminder for folks, we're going to have a few minutes for clarifying questions. If you please limit your comments to questions at this point, just to make sure you understood what Pete presented, because we first want to give the public an opportunity to comment so that it informs the subsequent more detailed discussion that you will have shortly after public comment. So any clarifying questions at this point?
And while folks think about that, I just also want to recognize that Veronica O is here with us this evening, I think maybe from very far away. Thank you, Veronica, for joining us. And so she was instrumental in putting this together and may also be answering questions. So thanks for being here.
And I noticed several of the GPAC members' names on that list of core team members. So thank you all also for your contributions. Mary, a question.
Pete, could you clarify the radius? Is it a 3/4 mile radius or is it a 3/4 mile diameter?
Mary, I will not clarify for you. It's the way they interpreted it, it's a 3/4 mile radius. And I'll just say that as I familiarize myself with the concept of 15-minute neighborhood, it's not tightly defined. There are different definitions, different radii. In some interpretations, it's the radius, some it's the diameter, some talk about walking or biking, some definitions talk about transit. So it's really very fungible, but in their interpretation, it was a 3/4 mile radius.
Thank you. Bill.
That was a great presentation, but I was just curious, if we create 10 to 11 foot wide paths for bicycles and pedestrians, I wasn't clear. Some of the slides look like everybody's kind of mingled together. And I'm just thinking that the cyclists often, if they're using it for transportation, they're just not meandering. They're trying to get someplace. They're going faster than pedestrians are. Is a 10 or 11 foot wide pathway sufficient to separate cyclists going one speed and pedestrians going another?
Bill, I'm not a transportation expert, but one of the things that I'd want to point out is that you heard in the goal of our 2008 Bike Pedestrian Master Plan that it seemed to be anticipating the needs of cyclists and pedestrians. And if we are looking ahead to the future in a realistic way, we need to think about all different kinds of mobility devices, both human-powered and electric. And my sense is that maybe 10 feet is not the best dimension, but we need to accommodate, skateboards and hoverboards and young children on bicycles. You and I, perhaps being more confident cyclists, we might want to just ride in the road with the big trucks and buses. But I don't think we can neatly segregate all different types of mobility devices, each with their own separate lanes. I think we have to recognize that at some point, all of these different people on all these different devices will be just mashed together, and that will work as long as average speeds are kept limited.
Okay, thanks. I think it's something that'll sort itself out as it progresses, but I'm just thinking out loud. Thanks, Pete.
Thanks.
Any additional GPAC clarifying questions before we go to public comment? Seeing none, Daniel, if you wouldn't mind facilitating public comment on this agenda item, and then we'll come back for GPAC discussion.
Sure. Thanks, Ron. So we'll go ahead and reopen public comments. Please keep your comments specific to the agenda item that was just presented on. And so with that, if you'd like to make a public comment, please utilize the raise hand feature in Zoom, and just let us know if you have any questions about how to do that. So with that, hi, Darren. Looks like we have one hand raised. It's Darren. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. When the timer starts, go ahead and the floor will be yours. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Daniel. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, thanks, Darren. Go ahead.
Perfect. Well, first, I just want to thank Pete, Veronica, the whole team that put together the STAT program. The opportunity to have that impediment is beautiful. I think the vision is beautiful. We just saw this at Tree Committee last evening. I think one of the biggest things for implementation is we're going to have to figure out how to navigate the private property situation with tree care. A lot of street trees, public works responsibility ends at the curb. And that means that it's private property owners that have to care for street trees. So some of these beautiful corridors, which is a design concept that, seems so obvious as how great an idea it is, but it's challenged by the fact that, we would need to work with private property owners to have them plant the proper trees, care for the trees. Even if the city wants to take over watering of the trees, I've heard that the city would need to get an easement to use water coming off of that resident's water line because there's not a separate water line that is just for the city. So there's kind of some complications to navigate there. And I think if we can get a handle on that, by asking Public Works, who I've had a lot of success with, just as members of the public, reaching out and saying, hey, we want more street trees. How can we work with Public Works to navigate the access issues, the maintenance issues, and then also, having that personnel and Public Works staff who knows about tree care, because if we're going to ask to expand the scope to take care of street trees, we have to make sure that there are personnel on staff who can look at that. And that would probably also mean changing budgets. And it sounds like the kind of thing perfect for general plan discussion. I also want to make a quick comment on general plan process. I just want to get a gauge on, I think there's a lot of discussion that still has to happen on land use and some of these big kind of meaty topics that the general plan really lays out that end up setting the table for future development projects. There's giant questions of zoning and what different areas of the city we want to see land use designations and future visions for. So if any staff or GPAC members have updates on when we might see some of those decisions or discussion items coming out of this process, just so we don't get to the end and suddenly have to rush through some of the biggest kind of topics that have a huge impact, like land use. But anyway, thank you so much for the presentation. I love to see more trees. And as I said, I think as members of the public, just reaching out on this issue in particular about navigating the street tree issue and seeing how Public Works could add this to their purview, what that would look like, right? Because they already take on so much, and just learn about that process and kind of move the needle. I think that would go a long way to implementing this incredible vision. So thanks for all your hard work.
Great. Thank you for your comment. Next up, we have Dwayne. So Dwayne, whenever you're ready, go ahead and unmute yourself, and I'll go ahead and start the timer whenever you're ready. Dwayne, are you there? You should have the ability to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Great.
It just appeared on my screen. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I was impressed with the description of downtown. I'm a great fan of the downtown area of Petaluma. But the descriptions of the various nodes, one of them describes the northeast corner of town and mentioned the fact that they have a grocery store and a number of restaurants, playground, playing fields, all in the within 15-minute walking area. And what hasn't been mentioned is how did that come to be the case that one place would be exceptional and on the east side and the south end would be obviously in need of exactly that type of a marketplace being created. And so as to follow up as to how to create that which is admired on the northeast corner, as to how to create it on the southeast corner also. I worry that the financial situation is that some markets would be under pressure to close. And I would like to see us design it so that the land that is zone market stays market within 15 minutes of everybody's home, that they're able to get good, fresh food, not sugar and booze that seems to be the specialty of some very small drive-through markets. I would point out also that's kind of out of the area here is that we have a country where we give $2,000 a year, according to most sources, to subsidize cars. And the state gives $600 a year to subsidize cars. And this enormous subsidy to cars serves to undo all the great work this committee is doing. And how to get this stopped, the subsidies to automobiles is going to be a major project if we're going to deal with climate change. And one third point, it appears that our smart people want everyone to drive across Washington in order to get over to the East Side Smart Station to park and to ride. And it's exactly the opposite of what this group attempted to do for Washington, is to make it into a single lane each way and with lots of trees. So it's the question is how we convince other government agencies to respect what we're trying to do here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for your comment, Dwayne. And next up, we have Taryn. So Taryn, whenever you're ready, go ahead and unmute yourself, and I'll start the timer when you're ready. Thank you.
Hi, I'd like to thank the community members who worked so hard for so many years, starting back in 2020, I believe it was, or was it late 2019. Thank you for volunteering and doing this without pay to provide this vision for our city that otherwise we would not have. I just really want to thank you. It's excellent work. Yesterday, when you presented to us on the at the tree committee meeting, I asked this question, so I'm asking it tonight, just to bring it up with a new audience, and not specifically to the presenters and the citizens that did such excellent work. And that question is, what are we going to do to close the gap in terms of vision, to translation, to specifically what we want where, to codes, to ordinances, to zoning, to specifically where is that going to be in the general plan, and specifically which language in the general plan. Earlier tonight, I spoke about my concern that we're not given enough time. This thing is due in less than a year. Take out vacation, take out people not showing up to meetings. I do not want to see us with just 1 month, 2 months to review this. This is the kind of thing that we need to see the general plan draft now. We need to see the design standards now, because you want to look at it. You want to reflect on this vision. You want to discuss it across different committees as individual GPAC members. You want to discuss it with people that aren't in our town. You want to think about it. You want to sleep on it. You want to come back and read it again. You want to go to another document, the River Access and Enhancement Plan. Study that. Well, exactly how should we tweak that and make that more concrete so that this vision has a better chance of happening? You guys, the devil is in the detail. And unless we have, I swear, a good 9-10 months to be looking at this document, these documents that are past due, and looking at the language and refining the language, discussing the language and refining the language, we're not going to have the excellence that we deserve. We don't want to miss these opportunities, and the devil's in the details. And when it comes to developments and all the legislation that's being passed in Sacramento that bypasses community input, bypasses public hearings, just moves us all to ministerial approvals, we are not going to have a prayer unless it's specifically in the general plan. So please talk about that. Demand it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Taryn, for your comments. So with that, I see no more hands raised. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing, turn it back over to Ron and Christina. Thanks.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you, members of the public. I was going to start by asking Pete, Dave, anyone else who was on the SSTAT committee, did you guys come with any particular questions or discussion prompts for the GPAC? If not, Christina and other city staff and I came up with a few that we thought would be interesting to explore, but I wanted to first see if you guys had any particular questions or anything in particular you wanted to ask the GPAC.
Yeah, go ahead.
That was me.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay. In answer to your question, Ron, I was probably considering myself more a GPAC member this evening than an SSTAT member. But I did make a list of things I wanted to respond to Pete regarding. Is now the right time to say those, or should I just get back in line with the other GPAC members?
Go ahead, Dave. We'll give you dispensation.
Just trying to do the right thing here. I'll start with one where I'm going to quibble a little bit, and I apologize to Pete for not having raised this earlier. I really should have. I don't understand why we talk at several points in that slide presentation about unreliable transit. I chair the transit committee. The reality is we missed about 8 or 10 trips last fall because we were just plain out of drivers in the aftermath of COVID. But we are probably more reliable than we've been in the history of Petaluma. Now, if you want to argue that we aren't frequent enough and we don't have enough coverage, absolutely, I agree with you. So I would like to see the word unreliable disappear from that slide deck going forward. Now to turn to the positive, the one word Pete said there that I just absolutely agree with is integrated. 2 quick stories. An early presentation of this, I had a good friend, a neighbor of mine who's very active in a local community, come to me and say, it can't possibly work. And there's a story that's come out recently about 50-minute neighborhoods fail when you can walk 5 minutes to get a cappuccino, but your barista has to drive 30 minutes to get to his job. And that's absolutely the point she was going to make. Unless we have more people in town who can staff these retail nodes, the whole concept doesn't make sense. So we get back to the integrated. Integrated can't just be creating retail nodes. It's creating housing options, affordable housing options, so the people who are going to staff the nodes to make it all work have a place to live where they can walk to their jobs also, not just the customers, but everybody. I guess similarly, in the transit committee last week, I heard the comment of, what if my preferred dentist or my insurance agent is not in my node? Do I need to get in my car anyway? And the answer is no. We need a robust enough transit system where you walk a couple of blocks, the bus comes along within less than 10 minutes, and you get to the node where your services are, and your car still stays in the garage. So again, we just can't do retail. It has to be the whole picture. In fact, really, I would say this fundamentally reworks the way Petaluma exists. It's not just applying a Band-Aid here and there. This is completely changing how we live our lives. We're going to have to get our hands around that. I'm not even sure I'm there yet, but I know it has to happen. Next point is, I heard zoning raised. I think maybe Ms. Obaid's comment touched on that. If we get too far into where does the node go, how do we zone for it, what does it look like, I think we miss the point. What the future is going to look like, we don't know. There are going to be things that change in our world over the next 20, 30 years as we adjust to climate change that we are going to be shocked by. If we try to assume we know too much about the future and get too precise in our zoning, we're going to get it wrong. there is a movement afoot now, and I'm going to hear one of the speakers just in the next week and a half on this topic, saying that zoning has been a fundamental failure for the last century in this country, and we should be greatly reducing it or completely rolling it back. I'm not sure I'm there yet personally, but it makes a lot of sense in this case. We should be, rather than trying to say how the future should be, we should be getting ourselves out of the way and letting the future organically evolve in the way it needs to meet what we need it to be. And then lastly, I want to touch on the question that Bill Wolpert raised earlier about how do we mix the different modes of traffic. Pete said speed management, absolutely correct. I'd even go further to say that the whole 20 is plenty movement is exactly what we need. No more than 20 miles an hour on no streets except a very few. And even that 20 miles an hour applies to bikes. Nobody goes more than 20 miles an hour. If you're a bike who's a serious biker and you can meld in with cars at 20 miles an hour, great. If you're a kid with training wheels, you get in the sidewalk. We sort ourselves out. We make it all work. But we have to stop. We have to get away from the people driving 40 miles an hour through a residential neighborhood. Thank you for the thumbs up, Pete. Okay, that's what I've got. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. And Mary, I see your hand up, but I also saw that Veronica went off mute for a second. Veronica, were there any other things that you wanted to add?
Hi, everyone. Good evening. I just wanted to, also frame this discussion about the 15-minute neighborhoods and living streets as just a new way of us thinking about having access to resources for our daily lives. And as people become more remote, working more remotely, and that as our work becomes more local, that we will require more amenities. So we're actually providing a service through this process to our community. And yeah, just looking forward to the discussion tonight.
Thanks, Veronica. Mary?
Hi. Yeah, definitely. I want to appreciate Veronica and all the hard work that she has put into this over the years, and Pete for pulling this presentation together, and other members who are going around and presenting to different committees. A couple of things I wanted to share. I'd like to put in the chat a link to a 15-minute city that was really spearheaded by Professor Carlos Moreno, who is French. Well, he's Franco-Colombian scientist, and won the World Habitat Award for promoting 15-minute cities, and the mayor of Paris adopted it, and it's been adopted in 9 countries, numerous cities, and this isn't a brand new idea. In fact, it's probably quite an ancient idea. It turns out that in just 70 years, we've become, all our cities have become car oriented to the point where this is what we consider normal, and thinking any other way is like taking something away, though this is a fairly recent development in city history. I love the Fix Washington First as the critical connectivity between our different parts of town, and what a great test case this would be to even if we could possibly prioritize it, but it should go front and center. I do really, I agree with everything Dave Alden said. And I also agree with what Taryn is asking for, in the sense that there's so much meat that is getting developed that we're not able to look at and respond to or get ahead of. That is concerning to me as well. But just on the topic of the 15-minute neighborhoods, it's really good if you listen to this well, I don't think it's a YouTube, but it's a video, news video. I think you'll see there are some challenges. There's pushback in the community. There's confusion and worry and fear because, as Pete said, it is major change to how we look at developing our town. So anyway, that's what I'd like to say, and let me know if it is possible to share the link or how to do that.
Thanks, Mary. If you want to email it to me, I can share my screen and also email it out to GPAC folks.
Thank you.
And while I'm talking, I want to talk about the schedule point a little bit. Unlike the housing element, there is no statutory deadline for the adoption of the general plan. And so we are working to define, like I mentioned earlier, a schedule that allows for full discussion of all of the topics in the general plan, and also aims for a completion that's not too far out. So I don't have that final estimated time. We are needing to respond to extended modeling timelines and all kinds of things. And so that's going to be baked into that schedule that we're gonna bring out next. I also want to note that, it has been helpful, and the city has been working with STAT folks since the beginning of the grant application and worked to try to help facilitate the meeting, etc. And so these are topics that we have been mentioning in these meetings and also have been thinking about in a lot of detail as we put together those general plan policies that we'll all be talking about in more detail soon. Jesse, please go ahead.
Oh, good. Thanks. Just a few comments and thoughts and reactions. Definitely love that Jane Jacobs quote, Pete, on community and social capital. And it made me immediately think about how much our built environment and what we're doing with the general plan affects mental health and social connections. And it also made me immediately think about this new report from the Surgeon General's office about the epidemic of loneliness, and how we can try to address that in Petaluma with our urban design and how so I think that's all really tied together and really key. Especially coming out of the pandemic. The other thing I was thinking of just a little bit about remote work, the comment I think Veronica made, but tying that to Dave Alden, your comment about being flexible, because so much of the remote jobs are no longer. So the remote job trend, remote work may be past its prime. There's a lot of new data on that. People getting called back to the office. I think less than 10% of jobs on LinkedIn are now remote. So I think to Dave Alden's comment, trying to remain adaptable with what we plan. It's very hard to predict the future. No one predicted a pandemic. No one predicted remote work being so omnipresent and then going down in popularity. So just, I think, thinking about our land uses and making sure we're planning for a flexible future. Also really hard to predict how AI is going to impact jobs. I work in data science, so I'm like really thinking about a lot about that. And I'm also thinking a lot about like autonomous vehicles and other types of like micro mobility that we can't even imagine that might pop up on the streets. So yeah, just finding ways to maintain adaptability, I think, is key here. And but I love the 15-minute concept and the 3/4 mile and as an access framework, and agree that it's, with some other comments, it's really beautiful and definitely can help us think about how our communities can be more cohesive. So kudos to you guys for putting all that work in.
Thank you, Jesse. Roberto, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, so once again, thank you, Pete, for a great presentation. I want to start off with the chart that referenced the visual of all the linkages between the 15-minute, walking radiuses for the communities. I think when looking at that, just at a quick glance, when you flash through it theoretically, it makes a lot of sense around kind of the more perimeter areas, right? Really, I'm kind of thinking realistically of how East Washington is currently impacted by being probably the most flow rate of traffic we get. And so when you flash to East Washington and then there's that theory, that visual of like, if we shorten it, let's narrow down to one lane on each side. I think it's a great vision. We all want that, but in reality, it's like our highest, densest kind of, traffic area. And I'm wondering if, showing that and and kind of implanting that as like, yes, this is what we're going to do might be kind of counterintuitive of what other risk factors may lie by, shortening it right away. On that note, though, right, we haven't really talked about, and this one's kind of a very extreme idea, but, second tier, making it 3D, right? Like if East Washington is a very dense area with high traffic, and to Jesse's point about work from home, right? I've also started noticing that's going away. So if we are right now a commuter town, we kind of have to make a hybrid model of this, right? And also to let it be adaptable for the future. So I've never really thought about maybe, making East Washington a second tier, but what if you had, lower tier, all that roadway and stuff like that, and then upper tier where you get all the sun and make it more public accessible? You really negate everything else from that traffic standpoint, right? So, and then if you couple that with all these new units and housing developments, right, making that shorter doesn't really make sense, right? So I don't think it's a good assumption to say that our main, East Washington Road should be limited. I think it just needs to be reformatted, take a little bit of advantage of 3D space that we have, and especially with everything else that we have going on. So just wanted to throw that in there because for me, it really does not make sense to make it shorter, or sorry, short in the width sense of reducing the lane traffic. I think would cause more problems in the near term with the hopes of being successful long term. So that's my comment.
Thank you, Roberto. Josh, and then Bill Reiner.
Yeah, thank you. I'm a little I'm struck by that presentation and really deeply appreciative of all the work of the folks who made it happen and contributed along the way. Really, the way that it communicated a vision. I know that over the last however long it's been that we've been working together on this, we engage vision a lot, but I felt like that presentation brought together a lot of threads in a way that I found pretty impactful. The specific recommendations, appreciate them, and I was definitely taken by the boldness of like, all right, East Washington, and I think that can be. Well, I'm no tactician, but I love that as like an evocative, as a thought exercise at the very least, because if we can do it there, we can do it anywhere. I wanted to appreciate, I never considered what planning would look like without zoning. I just wanted to appreciate, I think Dave Alden mentioned that that's a thing that's, I hadn't conceived of that. And just the broader point about planning for in such a way that allows for possible futures, being fairly flexible in our approaches. That said, the specific stuff about work from home, I just wanted to observe that, we really don't know what's going to end up there, what that's going to end up like. I think it probably will ebb and flow. But one of the things that I tried to remind myself in this process is that we're sort of designing for a possible future. And like there's certain ones that we're trying to select over others. And remote work is one of those things that it's climate friendly, makes a lot of sense for as many jobs where it can be done. So that said, again, planning, who knows? We got to be fairly flexible and not too detailed in our thinking. Again, thank you everybody for the work on that.
Thanks, Josh. Bill, and then Allie and Kevin, thank you for your patience.
Great, thanks. Yeah, also big thanks. I've been a strong proponent for 15-minute neighborhoods for a long time, and even what I consider five-minute neighborhoods where I bought my own house was because I literally can go get nearly everything within 5 minutes, and I think that's even a model that's achievable here in Petaluma. A couple of things have been brought up about how do we accomplish this and how do we codify it? And I think a couple of things. First of all, Pete is right on. I mean, the street network is the public realm, and that is, and you pointed to our existing street standards. That is exactly the first step in how to get this implemented. I think the thing that this general plan committee and the consultant team should be doing, really, one of the main things is looking at our circulation plan and redefine the hierarchy of all of our corridors. And we need new street standards. We're looking at Washington Street and the section that you showed, Pete, that had the 13-foot bioswales. And, I think that would be great on Washington Street, say east of McDowell. But I would like to see McDowell or Washington between, say, the highway and the boulevard is much more urban, and it's more walkable. It's slower, sure, and it's narrower, but it's not a parkway. It's not a boulevard, but in some places that'll work. So again, I think really this committee, what we should be thinking about in terms of is a new street hierarchy, new standards, and answer Bill Wolpert's question about how do we integrate these. Well, maybe we have different corridors that are specialized for different mobility types, but at the same time, our main streets are comfortable for everybody. So then, and towards that, I think we have in our town, we have the SMART code, which is a great place to look for a lot of these answers. And about to what David said about allowing for flexibility. And the way we do that is kind of more form-based, transect-based planning. So it's a form of zoning. It's been adopted. We have it here in town, but it absolutely allows for mobility, variety, and also for flexibility in building types. And we just, we do that using the transect that I'm not sure how many people are familiar with it, but we have it already adopted in our SMART code, which sort of defines where our densities are, where our larger buildings are, where our, smaller buildings and neighborhoods are. It's a great standard. And I think I've had some conversations with the consultant team that, okay, we're not really doing form-based codes. But I think if we looked at that SMART code and thought, what problems do we have with it? Why isn't it, why hasn't everybody got sold on it, and try and solve those? I think it's really going in the direction that this presentation and that the 15-minute neighborhoods concept needs to go. So I would like to look there. So a couple things I think is looking at form-based zoning for the city, at least in our major corridors, and thinking in a transect basis. I think at reimagining our corridors, which we've been talking about all along, but actually developing the street standards in the general plan and have a hierarchy of streets that really focuses on these changes. So my next thing, I would just say, I kind of wanted to ask the consultant team if their understanding and their direction that we're taking these policy frameworks as they get developed, if it's consistent with what this presentation showed. So I think that's a question for you, Christina. Are you in agreement with that, or is it partially the way you're going, or what would you say? Sorry, put you on the spot.
I can take Christina off the spot. I can answer that if you want.
Go for it.
The simple answer is yes. I was in preparation for the meeting. I was reviewing the report and the presentation, and I think gone just about every point, there's related elements in the policy frameworks. So, and that shouldn't be surprising because each of the consultant team members were provided the SSTAT report as soon as it was published and asked to integrate relevant concepts as appropriate. And so I think you'll be pleased when you see those drafts and how things are reflected. So one thing that I'm just going to lift up is going to be an ongoing challenge, which we're still going to be talking with the city about yet, is the integration point that Dave made earlier. For the time being, the policy frameworks are organized by subject, and that doesn't necessarily do them justice in a way that, particularly like when you think about the integrated nature of 15-minute notes. So, but simple answer to your question, Bill, is yes. I noticed, Veronica, you raised your hand. I think we'd like to make this a conversation discussion between SSTAT team members and GPAC members. So if you raised your hand because you had a comment or response in response to what another GPAC member had mentioned, I'd welcome you to.
Yes, thanks so much.
I just wanted, and then I want to temper what Ron said. Go ahead, Veronica.
Okay, I just wanted to, I don't know if people heard me, but when I was talking earlier, I know Jesse mentioned that I talked about remote work, and I said, and localizing our work. So our whole goal as climate leaders is to create a work, localized work so that people don't have to travel. Because right now our figures are off the charts for people leaving Petaluma and entering Petaluma. I think it's in the number of between 16,000 out and 20,000 in or something like that every day. So just wanted to clarify that it was both and. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Veronica. And that's something that a lot of planners are looking at too, is jobs housing balance. It may not be all the same housing and all the same jobs. We are trying to have some balance there. I also wanted to say to what Ron was saying is, yes, all of this is reflected in the general plan. It's not all reflected verbatim coming out of the SSTAT recommendations. We don't, for example, at this point have a section of Washington Street talking about its transformation. And we're not necessarily thinking about precisely the nodes that the SSTAT group identified, but in spirit and concept, it's all carried through.
One more question. Do street standards, to what level will the GPAC or the general plan be addressing that? I know we'll have a circulation element. We'll have a new, probably a street network map, corridors map. Will we be talking about the actual street sections and standards? Okay. And that would come in future development code revision? Okay, but it's something we can be thinking about and providing policy that will drive that.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's a black and white. There's that. I think that's an open question still, because there's a way to address the form and function of a street without necessarily defining the standards in the general plan. And I think we're going to make every effort with the GP to be very clear about what the standards should reflect. Without, as folks mentioned earlier, being overly rigid and establishing, engineering drawings in a general plan that really has a much longer time frame, and the standards probably should be a little more adaptable over time. So it's definitely top of mind. The question is kind of how best to do that within the GP. So. And just quickly to Washington, it does feature somewhat prominently in the draft transportation policy framework. So it's not that we're not tackling it head on, but it certainly is of central concern, knowing that something needs to be, it has to be clear about what the future of Washington should be. So, Ali, thank you again for your patience. And then Kevin.
Hi, thanks. And please let me know if I cut out. My internet was a little unstable earlier today. So yeah, thank you for this presentation. And I think the 15-minute neighborhoods is a great idea. I always like to think about, the downtown node that we have as a 15-minute neighborhood and how popular that is and how many people from out of town are aware of it and people love it. And I think that messaging about the 15-minute neighborhood is really important so that people can understand and identify with something and feel like they're gaining something with a 15-minute neighborhood rather than having something taken away. And really understanding that having a 15-minute neighborhood is actually more convenient rather than, oh, you're slowing the traffic down, you're taking away my parking space. It's actually, you don't have to deal with traffic. You don't have to deal with finding parking, right? So I'd like to make sure that we're talking about it in those kinds of ways. And I'm just going to also jump on the bandwagon of fixing Washington is a must. I mean, I keep saying, like, if that's one thing I can do before I die, that is going to be where I'd like to die on that hill, because it's unsafe right now. It is, socioeconomically unsafe. It connects different racial groups, different income groups, and it's a barrier right now, and it's dangerous, and it's not okay to have that be one of the major corridors in a town like Petaluma. But I think also it's hard when we're talking about these big long-term implementation plans for people to understand what that means without actually seeing some of these, like chicanes, who knows what that is, without seeing that in real life. And I think there's a really great opportunity, especially with the general plan maybe being extended out another year, for some of those treatments to be able to be done so that people can see them. Feedback can be provided, community members can see what's going on. The DPW actually had a really great Zoom meeting regarding the Garfield Street repaving project, where neighbors logged onto the Zoom and were talking about the speeding problems that they have with cut-through traffic from folks leaving and going to Casa Grande for school times. And they were talking about maybe putting chicanes or small roundabouts in to test that as a demonstration project and see how that works and how the neighbors might feel about that. So I just think there's some really good opportunities that we should all be thinking about now of what can be done while we're still working on the general plan and the implementation pieces. And I think that just gets to my last and final comment that I wanted to make is about the implementation. I know when the 15-minute neighborhoods presentation was given by the SDAT to council last year, that there were some focus on, sure, this is a great idea, but how are we going to pay for all this, right? How are we going to implement all of this? And I think that it is important to talk about that and to give people an idea of how can we implement this, and maybe even start talking about, all right, we're going to pick one node and we're going to start implementing it there, because it's going to take a lot of money. It might take some, government subsidy. It might take the city subsidizing some affordable housing there. It might take subsidizing some small businesses there that for economic development. But it's not. I don't think it's going to be convincing for people to just anticipate that the laissez-faire market is going to create all of these 15-minute nodes, or maybe in 25 or 30 years the general plan will create these nodes, and that will be great. I think people want to see what is it going to do now. Thanks.
Yeah.
Kevin, if I could just make a quick comment before you maybe share yours. Allie, I appreciate your second to last comment, noting that some of this could be implemented while waiting for it to be integrated into the city's policy code and regulatory framework. And I appreciated that about the report. Page, I think it was back at the end, page 51 or so, there were a lot of ideas in the report specifically for how to begin implementation right away with demonstration and other types of projects. And that was one of the questions I came to this conversation with is, and maybe that's later for the folks who've been involved, is like, what do you have in mind in the near term for how to begin getting some of these ideas out there and testing them while we are continuing with the the planning process. But first, Kevin.
Yeah, first of all, what great ideas. Couldn't agree more with what Ali said in terms of piloting things, making them real, making them physical, even if they're not totally built out. And, you know, it's interesting. I'm a big student of architectural history. And if you look at Rome, Pope Sixtus back in the 16th, 15th century, went around and he said, there should be a node here, a node here, a node here. And those are all the great squares of Rome, and they all relate to each other. But it wasn't until like 250 years later that they were actually built out. But during that time, there was an obelisk in almost all of them. And that obelisk said, this is a node. It's not done yet, but it's going to be in the future. And it took 250 years. The last one, I think, was the Piazza del Popolo. And it told everybody what the plan was, and they stuck to it. So I think it's you know, even if it's doing some sort of striping on the intersection or something that make people realize physically that this is the plan, and that the reason for that thing being there is that in the future we're going to do X, Y, and Z. I really liked Roberto, I think it was Roberto's comment about going 3D. You know, it reminds me, I know Petaluma is a good deal smaller than New York, but the High Line in New York, where people circulate on a street above the traffic, it wouldn't have to cover the whole of Washington Street. It could be elevated areas. My problem with, I think what is shown in the report is wonderful, but there are still so many people going down Washington Street because it's the only connection to the freeway. And even though I do believe that in the long run, people will not work 5 days a week, because I think that experiment of going back to the office, frankly, is going to fail. That people will see no reason to go someplace to do what they could do at home in many instances. But we still have tons and tons of people going onto the freeway. And how do we deal with that? And I'm not sure that, I mean, I think there's already wailing and gnashing of teeth when this is discussed with, you know, people who think of streets only for cars. It's going to be a hard sell, and maybe thinking about it three-dimensionally is the way to go. You know, if we can't restrict that roadway so much. Also, I think it gets a lot of enemies, and you're pie in the sky and you're crazy when they are confronted with the idea. You know, they'll say, "Oh, it's already so crowded on Washington Street." There's going to be a lot of people. It's going to take a while to convince. Let's put it that way. I think that could happen in the future, but I think it's better to start with the nodes than to go too crazy on Washington Street right away, because I think you're going to get a lot of opposition.
Thank you, Kevin. I was going to be surprised if there were no more hands raised. Thank you, Brent, for saving me. Brent, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to express some appreciation to Pete for that really great presentation and the team that put all that together over the years. Extremely impressive. I'm very intrigued by the multiple greenway concept, where, you know, to take us off the topic of what to do with Washington Street, but to have multiple corridors that are friendly to alternative forms of transportation, whatever they may be. That's very interesting and intriguing from, especially my perspective as someone who lives on the east side of town, and how to access other areas, including beyond my 15-minute neighborhood. But I think at this point, I really sort of want to reserve judgment or endorsement on on this concept, or how high I want to support it relative to other priorities, at least until we've been able to consider additional policies as part of the overall general plan. And I guess my lens is a little bit, I'm a newbie to the committee, so I'm trying to still digest some of the priorities that we're grappling with. And someone mentioned, what is the cost to transition, these streets into greenways, and the cost of Washington Street, or maybe creating an elevated road over Washington Street. I'd like to understand that in the context of, what is our overall cost for drastically improving our transit system and electrifying buses as we must under the innovative clean transit regulation that's been adopted by the California Air Resources Board. How do we support low income households in Petaluma electrify their homes and adapt to this changing energy construct that we're going to have over the next few years. So I'm very intrigued by this concept, but I'd really like to understand some of the other elements of the general plan and other priorities that are going to necessitate funding, and what priorities all those line up in.
Thank you, Brett. I see Pete, your hand raised. And yeah, I was going to reinvite folks who were involved with the SDAT initiative to respond or comment on anything they've heard from GPAC members. I also see Chris's hand raised. Go ahead, Pete.
Thank you. I have a lot that I could say in response, but I just wanted to bring into the discussion this one idea that Washington Street is part of our high injury network. It is known that there are many fatalities and serious automobile related collisions on Washington Street. So that's one strong reason to fix it. But keep in mind this idea that if we were to narrow Washington Street to one lane in each direction instead of two, then our signalized intersections would be candidates for roundabouts. And in communication with Ken Eichstadt, our chief traffic engineer, there is a wealth of data supporting the idea of roundabouts instead of signalized intersections, that roundabouts move traffic much more quickly or much more steadily and smoothly than signalized intersections. And if there's one thing that everybody in Petaluma agrees on, is that traffic is terrible, especially on Washington Street. So it's a little bit counterintuitive, but there is the potential that by reducing the number of lanes, we could actually increase the overall speed of getting across town. That's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Thanks, Pete. Chris.
Can you hear me? Okay, I'm here. So great evening. I'm learning a lot. I think it's really exciting. The one thing I want to bring up, and there was a news release, there's a study that was out this week. I just sent a link and a copy to Veronica. It talked about 15-minute cities around the world, and that one of the things that really needs to be paid attention to is the quality of the sidewalks. That if the sidewalks are not great for accessibility, they're not safe, that it sort of blows the whole thing out of the water. That, it's like right down to the basics, like when you walk out your front door and you want to take advantage of that 15-minute neighborhood, how easy is it to walk to get to where you want to go, based on all kinds of accessibility issues. So, I'm a newbie to this whole thing. I don't really have anything much more to add. I'm excited. I think the concept is great. It seems overwhelming, and I love the idea of what is planned or vision for Washington Street, and I can just imagine the vitriol that is going to be raised with that. And I think it's just something that if this is a concept that we really want to get behind, that people need to think about that and think about messaging. I mean, it's going to be it'll be a hullabaloo, but I think it's probably a hullabaloo that's worth getting into.
If planning's anything, it's a hullabaloo. I'm going to turn it to Veronica and then the two Bills.
Thanks so much. I just wanted to make a comment about just our framing of this concept and, trying to grapple with all the limitations that it seemingly provides for our brains to, get around because we have such a different land use right now. But it's really not a bubble. It's a platform. And thinking of it as not a bunch of restrictions, but as a platform to an entry to solutions for our equity and climate goals, for our transportation goals. It's really it's a nice umbrella that has to be defined by this group and people who are involved at the city who are doing the planning. I think there's a lot of neighborhoods around the world that don't provide amenities for the people who live in them. And if we're equity focused in our general planning, then we have to look at what does exist for people. What is life? Looking at the user, looking at the experience every day for people when they, get out of their house. What is it? How are they living? So I think it's kind of scary and exciting at the same time, just having something so new. So I just wanted to encourage everyone that we're all in this together, as Pete said. Thank you, Pete. And yeah, I think we can just also realize that we're all ambassadors for this type of vision and that the community came together. Over 350 people participated in this in one of the largest community events ever held in Petaluma, and that it was the results, time and time again, people said the same things, and that this report reflects those community inputs. Thanks.
Thank you. Bill Wolpert.
Yeah, I guess I want to tag on to what Veronica just said. And before she spoke, I was thinking that I don't want to see us get sidetracked on figuring out how do we implement all these things, because that's not our job. This general plan that we're creating it's a vision document. So what Pete has presented today is exactly what we're trying to accomplish. As Veronica said, there's been tremendous community outreach and involvement to develop the different aspects of this vision. But it's up to our zoning code, our smart code, our specific plans to implement these things and then get into the weeds on how do we actually do this. But that's not our job. Our job is to create the vision for where we want to go into the future. And I think we're on track. So I just want to encourage everybody, don't get discouraged by what feels overwhelming right now, because we don't really have to deal with it right now. What we want is a vision for where we want to go and how we want to live our lives and what kind of quality do we want to create for everybody. So that's my comment.
Thank you, Bill. Bill Reiner.
Agreed. Thank you, Bill, for the perspective there. Good setup for this. I want to just throw out a concept which I think is going to require a lot of suspension of reality and piggybacking on what Bill said about creating the vision and looking, to the future, not figuring it out. But we've been talking a lot about Washington Street, but we're kind of talking about it in the sense of it's a corridor that connects east and west and connects people to the freeway. And really what I see is Petaluma, we all agree it's divided east and west somewhat. But I think Washington is more than just a connector. It really needs to be a node itself and a new Main Street, with the library and the fairgrounds. There are a lot of services along Washington right now, but it doesn't feel like Main Street. And I think that's a lot of it has to do with the form of the buildings. But it sure could over time. If every new proposal that's accepted, it has something that brings to a node or to the center of a town. Over time, Washington Street should be a Main Street. It should move traffic, sure, but it should also feel like the center of town because it is geographically, the center of town. Rather than, we have our historic downtown, we have shopping centers in the east side, but it would be great if more than just a connector that it was Main Street, So that's, taking a big leap, but it's a vision.
Go ahead, Mary.
Thank you. I agree with what the Bill and Bill said. Hey, this is just a question. Darren had brought this up in public comment and Chris had mentioned it. One of about the sidewalks, about street trees, about responsibility. Is there a mechanism to change and make the city responsible? And I mean this in the sense of, getting some consistency instead of this patchwork that you find in the downtown streets, on the sidewalks and, the trees, and getting a real robust urban treescape. Are there cities that do take that responsibility, from into the public realm? Is that a possibility for us?
I am not a public tree expert. Does anyone else who's been involved in the tree efforts locally know the answer to that question?
Can I respond?
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say, this is something I've been tracking for a long time, and there are certainly a lot of communities, and I can name a few examples, that have taken on the urban forestry as a public infrastructure thing, and they've been very successful, and it's certainly something we could do. And so I think that should be another goal, Mary, as you and I have been talking about through this open space and natural resources, and everybody. Trees should be elevated and should be accepted as city infrastructure, and just like you said, and I think we can. So it's been done. There are examples. We should talk more about that.
Yeah, thank you. Different cities do deal with it differently. Dave, please go ahead.
Well, it's not directly responsive to the street question or the tree question, but it's related to that. One of the points of controversy in Petaluma is that we still rely on the property owner to maintain sidewalk. As we heard said earlier today, if the sidewalks are broken, the whole 15-minute neighborhood falls apart. There are cities in California, I just recently learned Concord is one of them, that does make sidewalk maintenance a city responsibility. I'm not proposing it for Petaluma because of the way Prop 13 treats our city, but those are the kind of obstacles we need to overcome and start moving things like sidewalks and trees back into the city purview. Thanks.
Thanks, Dave. Darren, we've had public comment. We could take it again, I suppose, if the city would like, but we'd like to first complete the GPAC discussion. Do I see any other hands raised from GPAC members or our guests from the SDAT team?
Or do we want to share the questions that we put together?
They've actually been thoroughly addressed. One was general reactions, anything surprising, anything missing. Another was about what they thought of the two of the most transformative ideas, 15-minute node and converting Washington Street. And the last was, what ideas do you have for how to implement this in the near term while it works its way through the planning process? So.
Before we move on, I do kind of want to dig into the 15-minute node a little bit more, because the SDAT group, when they came, they intentionally chose to locate nodes on public property or on non-residential property, because they didn't want to get into the question of rezoning or somebody moving or something like that. Everybody owns their parcel, but Pete used a little bit different language, for example, and was saying, maybe we could integrate some commercial into residential neighborhoods or allow some commercial in residential neighborhoods. And really what this concept is about is allowing a little bit of evolution in some of our residential neighborhoods that are, where there may be houses right now. And there's no talk of taking away anybody's control of their property, but it does mean some change. We have, many of us, grown up or lived in these monocultural suburban neighborhoods for quite a long time. They've been in place for quite a long time. And so it's a fairly radical, you could say, or it could be a big change to allow those neighborhoods to begin to evolve. They haven't been in place forever. And so it is really interesting to think about that future. Just like Chris said, it could cause a big hullabaloo to say, maybe it's time for these neighborhoods to begin to allow to evolve, allow a little bit of change. Because where we're talking, as we're talking about infill development, et cetera, we're talking about new things happening in the existing urban form, rather than like a new 15-minute node somewhere. We're not creating a completely new neighborhood. This is the change of an existing neighborhood. Does anybody have any thoughts about that? I see Veronica's hand is up, and Roberto and Dave, please. Veronica, go ahead. Oh, Veronica, do you put your hand down? Can you?
Sorry, it was moving around, so I couldn't find my cursor. Sorry. No, I just had a quick comment about just the idea of creating. There was an earlier comment about implementation and some idea about somehow identifying some places or districts or nodes that already exist, and then trying to thicken those with amenities or things that would be identified as the definition of what amenities are for Petaluma, like what is kind of our list. I think could be a really good exercise to figure out how those different neighborhoods could provide more amenities for its residents, in conjunction with private property owners, starting the conversation about creating places and placemaking.
Thank you. Dave, what did you want to add?
Well, in the last, I guess, during the course of this meeting, I've heard a couple of strong towns ideas brought up. Not that they were tied to strong towns, but I thought they were worth sort of reminding people of the strong towns philosophy. With regard to what you said a few minutes ago about changes to neighborhoods, key of strong towns is no neighborhood should be immune from incremental change. On the other hand, no neighborhood should be subject to cataclysmic change. That's the only way you build wealth. And then earlier this evening, Ron used the phrase strode. And I don't know how many of you have heard that word before, or maybe you don't know what it came from, what it really means. If you go back to what Strongtown says, they define, we have two kinds of streets. We should have two kinds of streets. Streets, that are the places you build wealth, commercial, office, even residential, wealth of family life, community life. So Kentucky Street might be the best street in town, but a lot of us live on things that function as streets. And then roads are places that connect places where wealth is built. They connect collections of streets. A road is the ultimate road is a freeway. A strode then is something that tries to do both. You have businesses along it, but you're also conveying people through town. And as the founder of Strongtown would say, it's like a futon. It's a bad couch that turns into a bad bed. It just can't possibly work. So just a way to think about the concept.
Thanks, Dave. Roberto, please go ahead.
No, I'm glad you brought that comment up, Christina, because those were some thoughts that were running through my head about what would be some of the impacts on kind of the existing architecture of just the design, right? Because over these last 2.5 years, we've been kind of, I want to say, bounded by not this type of philosophy, right? So you're almost looking at if, this is a big assumption, right? Like, but if this were be the model, what are some of the architectural change that we would need to implement, I guess, to adjust over the last 2 years? And one that comes to mind, right? Like, we spent a lot of time about talking about housing development and where they were going to go, et cetera. And so I don't have, it's not really an answer. It's more of like a comment. But when you describe that, I was thinking of those facts of like, okay, this is a great idea, but we have not been tailoring or like a discussion at all towards like, hey, let's try to aim for this type of model. And everything that we designed for the changes, housing, streets, pathways, have been based on a different baseline of an architectural design as a city. And so, yeah, those are just my thoughts, because it's a huge change, especially when you look at it's like, okay, what currently exists? Are we going to have to like demo some houses to make room for this and this or stuff like that to have accessibility, in different areas? And so, yeah. So just want to express some thoughts based on what you said. So thank you.
Thank you. It's a bit of a different paradigm. All right, Allie, please go ahead.
Sorry, trying to find my mute button. Yeah, I liked the question, and I liked Veronica's extra comment about thinking about what the actual list of amenities would need to be, because I think that box that those amenities could fit in could look a lot different depending on where the different nodes are. And maybe right now there's an underutilized piece of land that could accommodate many kinds of different structures. Or talking about placemaking and thickening, I mean, we've got a really good opportunity coming up here with the new skate park on the east side, right? I think that'll be really a vital node for the community, and there will be a lot of opportunity potentially for intergenerational activities to build on what's already going on there, and it'll bring a lot of people. I mean, I don't know, I talked to some skate folks that are like in their 40s, which is like, oh, people in their 40s are going there with their children who are 5 or 10 years old. Wow, this is great. Everybody can do the same thing. It's like pickleball, I guess, so it's just the opportunities to have different things that different age groups that are participating in. Maybe there are some commercial uses there. Maybe there's a coffee shop next to the skate park, because then people can go utilize that too. It's just, it doesn't have to be the same thing in every node. Doesn't need to be this like cookie cutter, this is what a 15-minute neighborhood is. And I think that was another comment about not being too prescriptive about what we're trying to talk about here, so it can kind of organically form, and maybe the exact amenities in one node are a little bit different than what is in a different node.
Great, thanks, Allie. All right, Mary, please go ahead.
I'll just make this quick. Just looking at the different use, for example, the graphic that Pete showed with the circles. It's a great way to start thinking about it, and go into a circle and see what's there. There's a park, but there's no there's no small office building, or there's no chiropractor, or there's no doctor's office, or there's no small grocery store, or there's no cafe. But maybe some of them have one or two of those things. Or where is the school in this node, or the daycare? And that's how you really do. You can go real time and look and find an empty lot, or an underutilized building that could be transformed. I mean, this is the real work. So we're on this kind of theoretical vision part that Bill Wolfert talked about, and I think that's like step one. Like, get behind it. If you believe in it, go for it. But I don't think it's so daunting to start to look at it in real time and real land ground proofing, of how to really evaluate the needs of different places and let it be a community participatory event. So anyway, it's pretty exciting to me. I can imagine things happening. Just money and time. Anyway, that's all. Thanks.
Thanks, Mary. Chris, please go ahead.
So just following up, Mary set me up for my comment. I mean, it's just a possibility there could be GPAC field trips to a particular possible node where a group of us could take a survey and walk around, and we could do our own visioning, which I think would be like really fun. It'd be outside, it'd be safe, so we wouldn't have to, worry necessarily too much about viruses, and that we could bounce ideas around, or at least share our sense of things with each other, because there's a ton of stuff that I'm not aware of, and if somebody points it out, anyway, I would be in favor of that. So I'm just going to put that out there as a possibility. And also, I just keep thinking about, we're going to get this new train station, the second train station. So that's a piece of, that's going to go there, but the surrounding area, there seems like there's possibilities there. And is that like a case study for the general plan, or where there could be a vision for that part of the east side of town? Because there's a lot of blank canvas there, or semi-blank canvas, and that seems like that's another opportunity. We have areas in town that seem like they're pretty much not set in stone, but they are what they are. But maybe there's something to do with that part of town. Just a thought.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. The city actually submitted. The city in early 2020 established, or late 2019 established, a priority development area that surrounds the planned Corona Road station, and then actually goes all the way out McDowell to Washington. And then there's another planned development area that's around downtown, the downtown station, that goes up to the freeway. Anyway, we submitted an application for grant funding from ABAG, our regional agency, to do a specific plan for that priority development area surrounding that station. So you're not alone in thinking that it would be a good thing to study in a lot more detail. And we should hear about that in a couple of months, hopefully, to find out what the recommendations are on it. And on the tour idea, Veronica and team put together a pretty amazing tour for the SSTAT folks. So we should think about a little walking tour, or that was a bus tour, which was also fun, to think about how all of this stuff could hit the ground. Thanks for that idea. Brent, please go ahead.
Yeah, Christine, I heard you present the question, how could nodes evolve organically over time? And I'd be certainly interested in learning and understanding how we can ensure that certain communities aren't left behind in that evolution, while, let's say more affluent nodes within Petaluma evolve more quickly or more nicely than less affluent nodes, so that we have some social equity built in, or to ensure social equity during the evolution of that process.
That's a great question. We have a pretty exhaustive analysis that we developed as part of the general plan existing conditions work that helps to identify draft and very close to final disadvantaged communities. We could call them communities of focus, but the legal term is a disadvantaged community. And so I think it's a great idea I hate this phrase, but I'm going to use it anyway because that's the only one I can think of, to crosswalk the idea of 15-minute neighborhoods in those disadvantaged communities and think about where those nodes might be or how to support them. So thank you for that. Phil, please go ahead.
Just to follow up on Chris's idea of doing a ground truth walking tour, and regarding the smart station site, about 10 years ago, we did a station area plan and we did a focused development plan for that area. I'm great to hear that there's a grant opportunity to revisit that. But I think it would be really fun to pull that out again and sort of ground truth it and see how much of it still holds up, what new opportunities there are, and just as sort of a case study, because I think we still have that on the shelf. I can't remember how deep, it wasn't as specific as the downtown station area, but we did a station area plan, so it'd be a good start, just for a fun tour. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. All right. If nobody else has any comments for now, we'll all keep talking about this. This is not the first or last time that we're going to be talking about these topics. In fact, it's a really great opportunity to kind of kick us off into a new phase of the general plan that's not all about housing, or the first ideas of policy development. So thank you, and really appreciate the team, the SSAT team, and all the GPAC folks who participated, and et cetera, everybody who attended that incredible meeting that they put together. Thanks for this work. And let's go ahead, Darren, you've been waiting. Why don't we give you 3 minutes, Daniel, if you can.
Absolutely. Just go ahead and get the timer set up. Okay. Darren, whenever you're ready, we'll start the timer. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. And thank you, Christina, for that leadway. I just got so excited. I wanted to add on this whole urban forestry discussion. The reason I brought that up, the tree committee, the tree committee has been listening to Cindy Chong talk about her progress on implementing a $250,000 urban forestry grant our city got with help from folks like Councilmember Shribs and Relief. And that plan is really starting to move forward. It starts with a survey of trees on public lands, but also, most importantly, I think, includes consultation with an urban forester. In this case, Daniel, and his last name is escaping me right now, but that kills me. But anyway, we're going to have an urban forester come in and lay out some tenets and principles around a successful urban forestry plan. There's been a lot of talk about a tree ordinance. That's not really the same thing. That's one piece of a larger plan. And included in that is discussions of how do we get staff on board. And at the tree committee, we have a communications and outreach ad hoc that includes Taryn and Roger McCarlane on tree and planning. And we had a conversation with Brian O, our new director of community development, who is totally on board with visions like this, and not calling it the exact SSAT vision, that we did talk about that, just that idea of greening this kind of skeleton framework of these greenways around streets and rivers is an incredible idea that community development is on board with, and he sees in the future bringing on board that urban forestry expertise, or maybe urban design with a lot of experience in urban forestry on some kind of long-term basis, whether that's personnel or more likely someone contracted to come in and help push that policy forward. We'll also be planning to meet with Public Works, hopefully Chris Bolt, and talk about what does it look like to expand the purview of Public Works in Petaluma. Again, this is a core issue. I think there's a lot of exciting movement around this, with like urban forestry coming to the fore. The work of folks like Bill Reinhardt, Bill Wolpert kind of set the stage for this over the years. And something like the SDAT actually is super useful as a platform to give a vision. Last night at the tree committee, we told Pete, this, just having pictures of what the roads could look like, these are powerful tools when you have a meeting with someone. Say, look, here's what we want to do, and here's what that looks like. How do we get here? So I think there's a lot of exciting potential, and I appreciate you guys giving us that kind of visual, this kind of platform to start moving these ideas forward in really productive ways. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner. With that, I don't see any more hands raised, so we'll go ahead and close general public comment, and I'll send it back to Ron and Christina. Thanks.
Thank you, Daniel and Darren. And usually our last agenda item, same as the case tonight, is a final opportunity for any additional GPAC comment, unrelated or related to agenda items. Anything else on people's minds tonight that you'd like to share? Seeing no hand. Oh, there's Roberto. Go ahead.
Yeah, I know I ask this every time, but now we've been given like a whole different kind of, design philosophy for Petaluma. And I'm a very visual person. And so having these overlays that I always ask for would be so great. And like we just added on a whole different concept of what we could do with if we had these 15-minute walking radiuses. And so I'm going to ask again if we will ever have those, and given with all the different design implementations and things we've kind of discussed, I think having like just something layered on top of each other, just seeing the current layout of Petaluma with even this, and just like really visualizing it with where our housing development planning has looked, where our transportation has looked. I think it just from a visual perspective to be able to just click and turn on and off some layers would be extremely helpful at this point. So yeah, I just want to re-request that. So
thanks, Roberto. That's a good ping as we get into our land use conversation also, which will be very geographic. Veronica, please go ahead.
Thanks so much. I don't know if there was an ending beyond this, but I just wanted to extend my thanks to you, Christina, and the planning team, and Ron for the support and to provide the platform for tonight. It's wonderful that we're all going to be ambassadors for different aspects of this, because this is our community vision. And I just wanted to say thank you so much to the our core team that really has worked tirelessly, Mary and Pete and Ileana and Bill Wolpert, who also were part of the application team and have helped on the event. And it's just been an amazing experience. And I look forward to us. And Dave, sorry, did I mention Dave? If I forgot somebody's name, you'll forgive me because it's quite late for me and I'm a little, so yeah, I think I got everyone. Did I, Dave? Yes? Okay. Anyway, yeah, just thank you to everyone. And yeah, I look forward to us. The tour idea is awesome, and let's do it.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming, for the team to help put this together and the presentation together and everything. And we look forward to our next meeting. Good night.
Good night.